What if I told you that every terrible decision you've ever made, every relationship that fell apart, every financial mistake that kept you up at night, every moment you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back, could have been avoided? Not because you're stupid, not because you're unlucky, but because nobody ever handed you the one manual that changes everything. Today, that changes. Welcome to Bible Unfiltered, the channel where we go deep into God's Word without the fluff, without the filter, and without holding anything back. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what we're about to unpack together is going to permanently alter the way you see your life, your choices, and your future. We are diving into the Book of Proverbs, all 31 chapters, and by the time we're done, you are going to understand why the wisest man who ever walked this earth said that wisdom is worth more than gold, more than silver, more than anything the modern world is trying to sell you. Stay with me, because every single minute of this video builds towards something that will reshape how you think, how you speak, how you work, and how you love. Let's begin. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads. Two roads stretch out before you. Both look reasonable from where you're standing. Both have people walking down them. Both have signs promising good things ahead. But only one of them actually leads where you want to go.
The other one, and this is the terrifying part, looks almost identical to the right one for miles. You only realize you've taken the wrong road when it's far too late to turn back easily. That is life without wisdom. And that is exactly the problem that the Book of Proverbs was written to solve. 3,000 years ago, in a palace in Jerusalem, the most brilliant mind of the ancient world sat down and began writing. Not fiction, not philosophy for its own sake, not theology locked away in abstract concepts that only scholars could access. He wrote practical, ruthlessly honest, deeply human observations about how life actually works, about what leads to flourishing and what leads to ruin, about the invisible laws that govern human behavior, laws as reliable as gravity, as consistent as the sunrise. His name was Solomon, and what he left behind in these 31 chapters is not just an ancient religious text, it is the most comprehensive guide to human wisdom ever assembled in one place. And it is as relevant to your life right now, in this century, with your smartphone and your mortgage and your complicated relationships and your career anxieties, as it was to the young men of Jerusalem who first heard it thousands of years ago. Stay with me, because we're going to go through this entire book together, chapter by chapter, theme by theme, and I'm going to show you things in Proverbs that will stop you cold.
Things that will make you understand why the people in your life who seem to navigate everything so gracefully, who always seem to make the right call, who are respected and at peace and genuinely happy, why they operate so differently from everyone else. It's not luck, it's not privilege, it's wisdom, and wisdom can be learned. Before we open the book itself, you need to understand the man who wrote it. Because the authority behind these words is not just literary authority. It's not just the authority of experience, though that's there too. The authority behind Proverbs is something altogether more extraordinary. Solomon was born into royalty. His father was King David, the warrior poet, the man after God's own heart, the shepherd boy who became the greatest king Israel had ever seen. But Solomon was something different from his father. Where David was fire, Solomon was light. Where David was a warrior, Solomon was a builder. And before Solomon built anything else, before the great temple, before the palaces, before the trading networks that made Israel legendary, he was given an offer that no human being has ever been given quite the same way. God appeared to Solomon in a dream and said essentially, "Ask me for anything, anything at all." Think about that for a moment. Anything. If that offer was extended to you right now, what would you ask for? Money? Health? Fame? Power? A specific person to love you?
Protection from every bad thing that might happen to your family. Solomon asked for wisdom. Not wisdom so he could be impressive, not wisdom so he could win arguments. He asked for wisdom specifically because he looked at the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders, the responsibility of leading an entire nation, of making decisions that would affect millions of lives. and he recognized that he was not sufficient for that task on his own. He needed something that went beyond what he naturally possessed. And God was so moved by that request, so genuinely pleased that Solomon had asked for the one thing that would allow him to serve others rather than just enrich himself, that he gave Solomon wisdom beyond any human being of his era. And then, as an overflow of that gift, he gave him everything else too. The wealth came because the wisdom was there. The international renown came because the wisdom produced it. Queens traveled from the ends of the known world to sit at Solomon's feet and hear him speak. He wrote over 3,000 proverbs. He composed more than 1,000 songs. He studied botany, zoology, marine biology, astronomy, architecture, governance, psychology, and economics, not as separate disciplines, but as integrated expressions of a single divine wisdom that runs through all of creation. And from all of that, God preserved 31 chapters for us. 31 windows into the mind of the wisest man who ever lived, all of them pointing toward the same source of wisdom that Solomon himself pointed toward, the God who created the universe and established the invisible laws by which it operates. That is what we are about to explore. And I need you to keep watching, because what I'm about to show you in these chapters is going to completely redefine what you think wisdom actually is. Chapter 1 of Proverbs doesn't waste any time. It opens by telling you exactly what the book is for. Solomon says these words were written to give wisdom to the simple, to give knowledge and understanding to the young, and here's what gets me every time, to help even the already wise become wiser. This is not a book for beginners only. This is a book you can return to at every stage of your life and find something new. But then, 7 verses in, Solomon drops the single most important sentence in the entire book, possibly one of the most important sentences in all of human literature. He says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Now, before you move past that, I need you to sit with it for a moment, because that phrase is almost universally misunderstood, even by people who have been in church their entire lives. When Solomon says fear of the Lord, he is not describing the cowering terror of a slave standing before a cruel master. He is not describing the kind of fear that makes you want to run and hide.
The word in the original Hebrew, Yirat Adonai, carries within it a combination of awe, reverence, deep respect, and the recognition of genuine authority. It is the kind of feeling you get standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, looking out at something so vast and so majestic that you are suddenly viscerally aware of how small you are. And somehow, paradoxically, that awareness fills you with wonder rather than despair. The fear of the Lord means recognizing that there is a God who created this universe, that he built it with specific principles woven into its fabric, and that those principles operate whether you acknowledge them or not. Gravity doesn't stop working because you decide you don't believe in it, and the moral and relational laws that God embedded in human experience don't stop having consequences just because the culture around you has decided they're optional. This is the foundation. Everything else in Proverbs, every practical piece of advice, every warning about money or relationships or speech or work, rests on this single bedrock truth. Wisdom begins when you orient your life around God's reality rather than your own preferences. And then, without pausing, Solomon immediately shows you what the alternative looks like. He describes what happens when a young person falls in with the wrong crowd. He paints a picture so vivid and so psychologically accurate that it could have been written yesterday. They come with promises, easy money, excitement, belonging, the feeling of being in on something, of being chosen, of mattering. But Solomon pulls back the curtain. He shows you where that road ends. He says their feet run to evil. They rush toward destruction, and they have no idea that the net is being spread for their own feet. The trap is set by the very path they're running down with such enthusiasm. Keep watching, because the next several chapters of Proverbs are going to give you the framework that will allow you to see those traps before you step into them. That's what wisdom does. It gives you eyes. Chapters 2 through 4 form what you might think of as the foundational curriculum of wisdom, the core subjects that everything else builds upon. Chapter 2 introduces an idea that might be uncomfortable for people who expect wisdom to be easy or automatically given. Solomon says that wisdom must be sought, actively, intentionally. with the same energy and dedication you would bring to searching for buried treasure or a vein of silver in the earth. Think about what treasure hunting actually looks like. It doesn't happen by accident. It requires research. It requires effort. It requires persistence, even when the search is frustrating and unrewarding for long stretches of time. It requires being willing to dig in places where other people have given up. That is what the pursuit of wisdom looks like. He says, "If you seek it like silver and search for it like hidden treasure, then, and only then, will you understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." Notice that conditional. Then you will understand. Not before, not automatically. The understanding comes as the result of the search. This means that the people who say they want wisdom but aren't willing to pursue it are fooling themselves. You cannot receive wisdom passively. You cannot absorb it by proximity. You have to want it, more than you want comfort, more than you want entertainment, more than you want the easy answer. But here's why it's worth it. Solomon explains what wisdom actually does once you have it. It protects you. It guards your way. It delivers you from the wrong path before you're even aware that you are heading down it. It filters the people who enter your life, helping you discern who is genuinely good for you and who is drawing you toward destruction with a smile on their face. Wisdom is not just a nice upgrade. It is armor. It is a map. It is the difference between building your life on solid rock and building it on sand that looks solid right up until the moment the storm hits. Chapter 3 is where Proverbs offers what might be its most personally challenging instruction. And if you're honest with yourself as you listen to this, I think you'll feel it land. Solomon says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." The part we always focus on is the second half. We want the straight paths. We want the clear direction. We want the certainty that we're not going to make a catastrophic mistake. But we skip past the condition. Do not rely on your own understanding. This is the hardest thing Solomon asks of us, because we live in our own minds. We experience the world through our own perspective, our own feelings, our own reasoning, and our own reasoning usually feels pretty convincing from the inside. We have explanations for everything we do. We have justifications. We have ways of making our desired course of action look reasonable, even virtuous. But Solomon is saying your understanding is limited. Your perspective has blind spots you cannot see. Your reasoning can be hijacked by your emotions, your fears, your desires, your ego. You can construct an absolutely airtight case for doing the exact wrong thing and feel completely confident as you walk into disaster. The wisdom move is not to abandon your mind. It's to submit your mind, to hold your own conclusions loosely, to actively seek God's input before you act, rather than just asking him to bless decisions you've already made, to be genuinely open to being wrong. That is extraordinarily difficult. It requires a kind of humility that goes against almost everything modern culture teaches you. But it is the foundation of every good decision you will ever make. This same chapter gives you something else that I don't want you to miss. Solomon says that wisdom is more profitable than silver and yields greater returns than gold, that her value exceeds that of rubies, that nothing you could possibly desire compares with her. This is not religious hyperbole. This is the testimony of a man who had more wealth than any of us can imagine, who possessed everything the world could offer, and who is telling you clearly, wisdom is better. Not because material things don't matter, but because wisdom is the thing that determines what you do with everything else you have. Give a wise person nothing, and they will build something. Give a fool everything, and they will waste it. The determining variable is not the resources, it's the wisdom. Chapter 4 introduces what Solomon considers to be the most important self-protection strategy in all of human experience, and it has nothing to do with where you live, how much money you have, or who you know. He says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Everything. Your heart, in the way Solomon is using the word, is not just the seat of your emotions. In the ancient Hebrew understanding, the heart is the core of your being.
the place where your values are stored, where your character is formed, where your deepest convictions reside, where your identity is located.
It is the control center of the person you actually are, as distinct from the person you perform for others. And Solomon's warning is stark. If that center is compromised, if it becomes contaminated with bitterness, with lust, with greed, with pride, with the slow drip of wrong influences over time, then everything that flows from it will be corrupted. Your relationships will bear the marks of it. Your decisions will be twisted by it. Your words will carry it. Your work will reflect it. You cannot separate your inner life from your outer life, no matter how skillfully you try. This is why Solomon spends so much time in Proverbs talking about what you allow into your mind, your eyes, your ears, your companions, the content you consume, the conversations you participate in, the environments you place yourself in. None of these things are neutral. They are all either feeding your wisdom or feeding your folly. They are either helping you guard your heart or helping to breach it. Are you paying attention to what you're feeding yourself? Because this is going to matter more than almost any other practical question in your life. Stay with me, because the next section is where Proverbs gets uncomfortably honest about one of the most powerful forces working against your wisdom, and most people never want to hear this part. Chapters 5, 6, and 7, 3 full chapters, a full tenth of the entire book, are devoted to a single extended warning. And the fact that Solomon devoted this much space to this subject tells you something important about how seriously he took it. He is warning about sexual immorality. Now, before you assume this section doesn't apply to you, or before you decide that Solomon was just a product of his ancient cultural context and that things are different now, stay right there, because this might be the most urgently relevant portion of the entire book for the world we currently live in. Solomon describes a character he calls the wayward woman, but understand, he is using her as a representation of any temptation that operates through seduction, through the promise of pleasure, through appealing to your desires in a way that bypasses your better judgment. The specific application is sexual, but the principle is universal. He says, "The lips of this wayward person drip honey, and their words are smoother than oil. At first, but in the end they are bitter as poison and sharp as a double-edged sword. Their feet go down to death, and their steps lead straight to the grave." Solomon is not saying that the pleasure isn't real. He's not pretending the temptation isn't genuinely appealing. He is saying that there is a gap, sometimes a long gap, between the initial experience and the final destination. And most people, when they are being seduced, are not thinking about the final destination. They're thinking about right now. This is the mechanism of every destructive temptation you will ever face. It front-loads the pleasure and back-loads the consequences. It makes the offer look generous while hiding the price tag. And if you don't have wisdom that allows you to look past the present moment and see where a given path actually leads, you will find yourself standing in the ruins of something precious, wondering how you got there. Chapter 6 adds another dimension to this. Solomon lists 6 things that God hates, actually 7. Proud eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who lies, and a person who stirs up conflict among brothers. Look at that list carefully. Notice that almost every item on it relates not to dramatic, obvious crime, but to internal attitudes and relational dynamics. Pride, deception, manipulation, conflict stirring. These are the sins of ordinary life, the sins of the office and the family dinner table and the group chat, the sins we rationalize, the sins we dress up with reasonable-sounding justifications. Solomon is saying God sees those too, and wisdom means not just avoiding the spectacular failures, but guarding against the slow, quiet corruption that happens in the everyday. Chapter 7 gives us the most psychologically detailed passage in this section. Solomon describes watching a young man from his window, a young man who has no plan, no purpose, who is just wandering through the streets at night with no particular destination in mind. And because he has no destination, he ends up somewhere he never intended to go. He falls into a trap that a purposeful young man, walking a deliberate path, would never have encountered. This is Solomon's gentle and devastating point. Purposelessness is its own kind of danger. The young man in this story doesn't get in trouble because he was particularly wicked. He gets in trouble because he had no particular direction. He was available to be led. Are you living with purpose? Or are you wandering, available to be led wherever the nearest attractive offer takes you? Because the answer to that question will determine an enormous amount about where you end up. Chapter 8 shifts the register entirely, and it gives me chills every time I read it. Suddenly, wisdom herself is speaking. Solomon personifies wisdom as a woman, a noble, ancient, glorious figure who stands at the highest point of the city, at the crossroads, at the gates, and calls out. Not quietly, not in a whisper, loudly, publicly, urgently. She says, "Come, all of you who are simple, you who lack good judgment, come, and I will give you what you need." And then she says something that reveals the true depth and origin of wisdom. She tells us that she existed before the world was created.
That when God laid the foundations of the earth, she was there beside him like a master craftsman. That she was the delight of God's presence before humans existed. This is one of the most theologically profound moments in all of Proverbs. Solomon is telling us that wisdom is not just a useful tool. It is not just practical advice derived from human experience. It is a reflection of the very nature and character of God himself. The principles embedded in Proverbs are not arbitrary rules someone made up. They are descriptions of how a God-designed universe actually works. They carry the authority of the Creator. This is why wisdom works, not because wise people are smarter, but because they are aligned with reality as God designed it, and reality always wins in the end. You can fight against gravity for a while, but eventually the fall comes. You can fight against wisdom's principles for a while, but eventually the consequences arrive. He concludes chapter 8 with this: "Whoever finds wisdom finds life and receives favor from the Lord, but whoever fails to find me harms themselves. All who hate me love death." Strong words, but necessary ones, because sometimes we need to understand the true stakes before we take something seriously. Chapter 9 presents one of the most elegant literary structures in all of ancient literature. Solomon constructs a perfect contrast: 2 houses, 2 invitations, 2 voices, 2 destinations. On one side, wisdom has built her house on 7 pillars. She has prepared a feast, bread, wine, a fully set table. She sends out her servants to the highest points of the city to call out to everyone who passes by, "Come, eat my food, drink my wine, leave your simple ways behind and live. Walk in the way of insight." On the other side, folly has also built a house. She is also calling out. She also has an invitation. She also promises something appealing. She says, "Stolen water is sweet, and food eaten in secret is delicious." Same city, same crossroads, 2 voices, both calling your name. And here is what Solomon wants you to understand. Both invitations feel real. Both feel appealing in the moment. Both offer something you genuinely want. The difference is not in the immediate experience. The difference is in what lies behind the door. Wisdom's house leads to life. Folly's house, Solomon says flatly, is filled with the dead. Her guests are in the depths of the grave. 2 voices are calling you right now. They are calling you in your career decisions, in your relationship choices, in your spending habits, in what you choose to watch, read, and consume, and how you spend the quiet hours when no one is watching. Both voices sound reasonable. Both voices promise satisfaction. The question is, which one are you listening to? And more importantly, do you have enough wisdom to tell them apart? Keep watching, because the answer to that question is about to get very practical. Beginning in chapter 10 and running all the way through chapter 29, the Book of Proverbs shifts into a different mode entirely. The long speeches and extended poems give way to something more like a series of flashes, brief 2-line observations, contrasts, comparisons, and declarations. Each one is a complete thought. Each one is a world of wisdom compressed into the smallest possible space. This is the section most people are familiar with when they think of Proverbs, and it covers territory so wide that it essentially constitutes a complete guide to human life. Let me walk you through the major themes, because these are the places where wisdom becomes immediately, practically applicable. Work and diligence. Solomon has a great deal to say about work, and almost none of it is what the culture tells you. He says, "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich." He says, "In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty." He says, "The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied." The pattern here is impossible to miss. Proverbs treats diligent work not as a burden to be avoided, but as one of the primary pathways through which God's provision flows. This is not a prosperity gospel. Solomon is very clear elsewhere that wealth can disappear and that its pursuit can corrupt.
But he is absolutely insistent that lazy, half-hearted, uncommitted work produces poverty, and not just material poverty. The lazy person craves things they will never have because they won't do the work required to obtain them. They want the harvest without the planting, the promotion without the preparation, the relationship without the investment. And Proverbs says clearly that the universe is not designed to work that way. But there is something even more interesting buried in Solomon's teaching about work. He describes an admirable standard not just of effort, but of excellence. He says, "Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank." Skill matters. Excellence matters. The person who does their work with genuine craft and care, who takes pride not in the recognition but in the quality of the work itself, rises. This is not about ambition or ego. It is about the basic integrity of doing what you do as well as it can possibly be done. That principle works in every field, in every century. Are you bringing excellence to what you do, or are you coasting? Speech and the power of words. If there is one theme in Proverbs that feels specifically designed for the 21st century, it is this one.
Solomon's obsession with the power of human speech, what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and what we choose not to say, speaks with piercing accuracy into a world where every person carries a broadcasting device in their pocket and can transmit words to thousands of people within seconds. He says, "When words are many, sin is not absent, but whoever holds their tongue is wise." He says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." He says, "Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones." He says, "Like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow is one who gives false testimony against a neighbor." He says, "A harsh word stirs up anger, but a gentle answer turns away wrath." The picture that emerges from all of these is stunning in its precision. Words are not neutral. They are not just sounds or symbols. They are forces. They enter the minds and hearts of the people who hear them and produce effects, sometimes immediately visible, sometimes delayed for years, but always real. The word of encouragement spoken to a struggling person at the right moment can alter the entire trajectory of their life. The cutting word of contempt spoken casually can embed itself in someone's psyche and shape their self-understanding for decades. Solomon wants you to feel the weight of that. He wants you to understand that every conversation you have is a moment of consequence.
That the words you type into your phone at midnight and send without thinking carry real power. That the complaint you voice about a colleague affects not just your relationship with that colleague, but your own inner life. That the lie you tell, even the small one, even the one nobody will ever discover, shapes the kind of person you are becoming. The wise person, Solomon says, measures their words, not because they are timid or afraid, but because they understand the power they are wielding every time they open their mouth, and they take that power seriously. How differently would you speak today if you genuinely believed that? Because it's true, whether you believe it or not. Pride and humility. This might be the most countercultural teaching in all of Proverbs, and in the world we live in, where personal branding is a career path and where confidence is constantly conflated with competence, Solomon's words cut against the grain with extraordinary force. He says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." He says, "Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor." He says, "With the humble is wisdom." He says, "Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among his great men. It is better for him to say to you, 'Come up here,' than for him to humiliate you before his nobles." The mechanism Solomon is describing is not a moral rule that God arbitrarily enforces to punish the arrogant. It is a psychological and social law that operates as reliably as any physical law. Pride distorts your perception of reality. It makes you overestimate your own understanding and underestimate the wisdom of others. It makes you resistant to correction, which means you continue making errors that a humble person would have been corrected out of long ago. It makes you unable to genuinely listen because you are always waiting for your turn to talk. It makes you impossible to truly know because you cannot allow people close enough to see your actual self. Proud people are isolated, and isolation over time becomes catastrophic because no one is wise enough to navigate life without input, correction, and collaboration from others. Humility, by contrast, opens you. It makes you learnable. It makes you correctable. It makes you genuinely interesting to be around because humble people are actually curious about other people. It allows you to build real trust because real trust requires that you be willing to be known. And then, counterintuitively, paradoxically, the humble person rises, not because they are pushing their way up, but because everyone around them keeps pulling them up, because humble people are the kind of people others want to elevate. You cannot manufacture this by pretending to be humble while secretly believing you're exceptional. Solomon would see right through that. True humility begins with a genuine reckoning with your own limitations, with the recognition that you do not have it all figured out, that you have blind spots, that you need other people, and that God's perspective on your life is more accurate than your own. Are you humble enough to be correctable? Because that is the question that will determine how much you actually grow. Friendship and relationships. Solomon writes about friendship with a warmth and specificity that feels genuinely personal. These are not abstract principles. These feel like the hard-won observations of a man who has known great friendships and painful betrayals. He says, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." He says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." He says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." He says, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared." The picture that emerges is a friendship as one of the most powerful forces in your life, for good or for ill. The people you choose to be close to are shaping you, whether you are aware of it or not. Their habits are becoming your habits. Their values are influencing your values. Their attitudes are seeping into your attitudes. You do not have friendships without being changed by them.
This is why Solomon takes the selection of friends so seriously. He is not being elitist or antisocial. He is being honest about a mechanism of human formation that is as real as any physical process. You will become like the people you spend the most time with. Choose accordingly. But notice what he says a true friend does. Iron sharpens iron. Real friendship is not just comfort and validation. It challenges you. It raises the standard. It calls you to more than you currently are. The friend who only ever tells you what you want to hear is not loving you. They are keeping you comfortable in a place you should be growing beyond. Do you have friends who sharpen you, who love you enough to tell you when you're wrong, when you're making a mistake, when you are not living up to who you could be? And are you that kind of friend to others? If not, that is wisdom worth pursuing. Money and generosity. Very few subjects reveal a person's actual values more clearly than money, and very few subjects are addressed more extensively in Proverbs. Solomon has complex, nuanced things to say here, not a simple prosperity gospel, and not an ascetic rejection of material things, but something more sophisticated and more honest than either. He says, "Dishonest money dwindles away, but
but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow.
He says, "The wealth of the rich is their fortified city, but poverty is the ruin of the poor," suggesting he understands money's practical power without idolizing it. He says, "Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle." He says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." He says, "Whoever trusts in riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf." The overall picture is sophisticated and balanced. Work hard, be diligent, accumulate money through honest effort rather than get-rich-quick schemes, but do not make money the center of your life. Do not let it become the thing your confidence is resting on, because money is the most unreliable foundation imaginable. It can disappear with stunning speed and through no fault of your own. And be extraordinarily generous, not strategically, not as an investment strategy, but out of genuine care for others, because generosity is both a reflection of wisdom and a source of genuine flourishing. The person who hoards, who trusts in their accumulation, who allows money to become the measure of their security, is building their life on something that has no permanent foundation. The person who holds money with open hands, who works hard for it and gives it away freely, paradoxically ends up with more of everything that actually matters. That truth is as counterintuitive today as it was 3,000 years ago, and it is just as true. The discipline of children. Solomon is direct on this subject in a way that modern culture finds deeply uncomfortable, and I want to address that honestly. He says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." He says, "Discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death." He says, "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." Now, the rod passage has been used and misused extensively, and it's important to read it with the full context of what Solomon means by discipline throughout Proverbs. He is not advocating for abuse. He is making a point about the moral seriousness of the parenting task. The parent who refuses to set limits, who refuses to allow their child to experience consequences, who cannot bear to let their child be uncomfortable or unhappy, that parent, Solomon says, is not actually loving their child. They are choosing their own comfort, the comfort of avoiding conflict, of being their child's friend, over their child's genuine long-term well-being. Every child will encounter limits and consequences in the real world.
The only question is whether they learn to navigate those limits within the safety of a home where they are deeply loved, or whether they learn it alone in a much harsher context later. Loving parents shape their children's character, not just their behavior, not just their academic performance, but their character, their capacity for honesty, for delayed gratification, for empathy, for resilience, for responsibility. And character is formed through guidance that includes discipline, correction, and the experience of being held accountable. The last line is particularly striking. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. The spiritual and moral foundation laid in childhood has a permanence that nothing else quite matches. If you are a parent, or hope to be one, that is perhaps the single most important responsibility you will carry. Justice and integrity in business. Solomon is remarkably specific about commercial ethics. This is not the vague, be a good person of bumper sticker religion. This is detailed, practical, exacting. He says, honest scales and balances belong to the Lord. All the weights in the bag are of His making. He says the Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with Him. He says, better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. He says, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. In Solomon's world, merchants carried weights in their bags to measure goods in transactions. Having two sets of weights, one to use when you're buying, heavier so you appear to be getting less, and one when you're selling, lighter so your buyer appears to be getting more, was a common form of fraud.
Solomon is saying, God sees that. God cares about it. It is not a detail too small for divine attention. This translates directly into the modern world with perfect precision. The inflated invoice, the minor deception on the expense report, the exaggerated claim in the job application, the subtle misleading of a customer about what your product actually does, the corner cut on the deliverable when you know the client won't check carefully enough to notice. God sees those things, and Solomon's point is not just that you'll be caught, though dishonest gains do tend to evaporate in ways that honest gains do not. His point is that integrity is intrinsically valuable, that a life lived with consistent honesty, even when dishonesty would be profitable, even when no one would know, is a fundamentally better life. A life you can live openly, with nothing hidden, with no elaborate false narrative to maintain. The reputation you build through consistent integrity is worth more than any windfall you might gain through deception. And unlike financial wealth, reputation, once genuinely earned, is extremely durable. Are you living with that kind of integrity in the details?
Emotional intelligence and anger. This is another area where Proverbs demonstrates a psychological sophistication that feels startlingly modern. He says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." He says, "Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but one who has a hasty temper exalts folly." He says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." He says, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." The picture Solomon paints of a person without emotional regulation is stark, a city with no walls. Every enemy can enter unopposed. Every threat can penetrate to the center. There is no defense because the wall, self-control, has been breached. And the person without self-control is destructive in proportion to their capability. The more powerful you are, the more talented, the more influential, the more resources you command, the more damage you can do when your emotions override your judgment. History is littered with brilliant, gifted, capable people who achieved enormous things and then destroyed them in a moment of uncontrolled anger, lust, or pride. Solomon says the person who can control themselves is greater than the military conqueror, because controlling the self is harder than defeating an external enemy. External enemies can be fought with strength and strategy. The self requires something deeper, a wisdom that goes all the way down into the heart, that has genuinely formed your character rather than just adjusted your surface behavior. How is your self-control? Not when things are easy, when things are hard, when you're tired, when you're disrespected. One of the most practical threads running through Proverbs is the consistent insistence on seeking advice before making significant decisions. He says, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." He says, "The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice." He says, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." He says, "Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment." The person who insists on making every decision alone, who resists input, who bristles at correction, who surrounds themselves only with people who agree with them, is not displaying strength. They are displaying a dangerous kind of pride that will eventually lead them into decisions they will profoundly regret. Wise people actively seek out perspectives that challenge their own. They specifically look for advisors who will tell them what they don't want to hear, because they understand that the most dangerous blind spots are the ones you cannot see. And they create the kind of relationships where honest feedback is welcomed and even sought, rather than received defensively or not offered at all because no one trusts you enough with it. Who do you have in your life who can tell you when you're wrong? If the answer is no one, or if the honest answer is that you don't really let anyone get that close, that is worth examining carefully. Chapters 25 through 29. Wisdom in Practice. These chapters, compiled by the scribes of King Hezekiah, which itself tells us something important, wisdom is worth preserving across generations, offers some of the most memorable and concrete proverbs in the entire book. He says, "Through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. He says, "If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you." He says, "A quarrelsome wife is like the dripping of a leaky roof in a rainstorm," and it's worth noting that Solomon likely would say the same of a quarrelsome husband. Constant conflict corrodes everything it touches. He says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." He says, "Let someone else praise you, and not your own mouth, an outsider, and not your own lips." He says, "Like a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow, an undeserved curse does not come to rest."
He says, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly." That last one is jarring in its vividness, but Solomon uses it precisely because he wants you to feel the absurdity of what we all do, making the same mistakes repeatedly, returning to the same destructive patterns, going back to the thing that hurt us the last 5 times, and expecting a different result. Wisdom, among other things, is the capacity to learn from experience. Not just your own experience, but the experience of others, including the wisdom that has been carefully preserved and passed down in texts exactly like Proverbs. The fool never learns because they never examine. They move through life reacting rather than reflecting, driven by the current desire rather than the longer view. The wise person stops, reflects, examines what happened and why, adjusts, and gradually, over time, builds a kind of internal GPS that helps them navigate future situations with increasing accuracy. That is what we are doing right now, together. Chapter 30 introduces a voice we haven't heard before, a man named Agur, son of Jakeh. The opening of his contribution is disarmingly honest. He says, "I am weary, God, but I can prevail. Surely I am only a brute, not a man. I do not have human understanding. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I attained to the knowledge of the Holy One." This might seem like an odd way to begin a wisdom speech, but it is actually the most perfectly calibrated opening possible.
Agur's humility about his own limitations, his acknowledgement that he does not have it all figured out, that the deep things of God exceed his grasp, is itself an expression of wisdom. He knows what he doesn't know, and that awareness is the beginning of learning. Then he offers a prayer that strikes me as one of the most genuinely wise prayers in all of Scripture. He asks for 2 things only. First, keep me from falsehood and lies. Second, give me neither poverty nor wealth, but only the daily bread I need, just enough to live on. Not so much that I become proud and say, "Who is God?" and not so little that I am desperate and tempted to steal and dishonor God's name in the process. That prayer is the voice of someone who genuinely understands themselves, who knows their own vulnerabilities, who has thought carefully about the conditions under which they are most likely to flourish and most likely to fail. Agur knows that extreme wealth is a danger to his soul. He knows that extreme poverty is a danger to his integrity. He wants the middle, not mediocrity, but contentment, the freedom that comes from having enough without the corruption that comes from having too much. When was the last time you prayed that prayer? When was the last time you asked God not for more, but for just enough, and trusted Him with the definition of enough? Chapter 31 is the finale, and it ends in a way that surprises many readers. The chapter opens with words that King Lemuel received from his mother, a detail worth noticing. The wisdom of Proverbs is not the exclusive property of powerful men. It flows also from mothers, from women, from the quiet teachings given in private that shape kings and leaders and whole generations. Lemuel's mother warns him about things that could undermine his strength and his judgment, the misuse of his sexuality, the allure of wine, and then she charges him with something that remains one of the most urgent social obligations of any leader. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the cause of the poor and the needy, ensure that justice reaches the people most likely to be crushed by its absence. This is wisdom in its most outward-facing expression. It is not just about personal flourishing. It is about using the wisdom and the position and the resources God has entrusted to you in service of others, especially the others who have the least power to advocate for themselves. But then the chapter closes with something else entirely,
something that lands with peculiar power as the final word of this extraordinary book. It is a portrait of a woman, not a queen or a prophetess or a military leader, though she is more commanding in her own way than any of them. She is a woman of valor, eshet ka'il in the Hebrew, a phrase that carries the sense of force, strength, capability, and fierce competence.
She rises before dawn to prepare food for her household. She considers a field and buys it, planting a vineyard from her own earnings. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out to the needy. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband praises her. And then Solomon's great book ends with this: charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. The final frame. After 31 chapters of wisdom about how to live, wisdom about speech and money and work and friendship and integrity and self-control and pride and humility, the final image is of a life fully aligned with the fear of the Lord, a life that is productive without being exploitative, generous without being depleted, strong without being hard, wise without being cold. This is what wisdom looks like when it has been fully formed and fully lived. Not a theory, not a philosophy, a life, a person, someone who navigated the crossroads that Proverbs talks about throughout and consistently chose the road of wisdom and built something, a life, a family, a legacy that cannot be taken away by the passage of time. That is the image Solomon leaves us with, not as an impossible ideal, but as an invitation. Now, I want to speak directly to you about where you are right now, because this is the part that actually matters. You have spent this time walking through one of the most consequential books ever written, and somewhere in the course of that walk, something connected, something resonated, some idea struck you with the specific force of recognition, the sense not of hearing something new, but of remembering something you already knew was true, deep in a place that the noise of daily life usually drowns out. Maybe it was the reminder that wisdom is not given to those who wait for it. It has to be actively, deliberately, relentlessly pursued. And you realized that you haven't been pursuing it. You've been accumulating information, consuming content, moving through your days without the intentional posture of a person who is genuinely seeking to grow in understanding. Maybe it was the passage about guarding your heart, and you took an honest look at what you have been allowing into the center of your life, the content, the conversations, the relationships, the thought patterns, and you recognized that some of those things are not guarding your heart. They are corroding it, slowly, quietly, in ways that show up in your decisions and your speech and your relationships without you always being able to trace them back to the source. Maybe it was the Proverbs about speech, and you thought about your own words, the things you say online, the way you talk about people who are not in the room, the patterns of complaint or criticism or flattery that have become reflexive. And you felt the weight of what Solomon is saying, that those words have consequences you may not even be aware of yet. Maybe it was the chapter about work, and you recognized that you have been half-hearted, that you have been doing the minimum, watching the clock, waiting for the promotion without doing the work that would make you worthy of it, that you have been talking more about what you want to do than actually doing it. Maybe it was the sections about pride and humility, and somewhere in that material, you caught a glimpse of yourself, the defensive response when you're criticized, the difficulty genuinely listening when someone else is speaking, the subtle but constant effort to appear more capable and more put together than you actually feel. And you recognized that this is costing you, in relationships, in growth, in the genuine connection that only comes when you are willing to be honestly known. Whatever it was, that is the beginning, that moment of recognition, that willingness to hold up Solomon's mirror and look honestly at what it shows. That is the first step of wisdom. And here is the extraordinary news. It is never too late to take that step. Proverbs was not written for people who have it all together. If Solomon had only been interested in writing for people who were already wise, the book would be a lot shorter and a lot less useful. It was written for the young man who has been making reckless decisions and is only now beginning to realize the cost. For the middle-aged person who has achieved everything they thought they wanted and found that it left them strangely empty. For the older person who is looking back at a trail of painful choices and wondering if there is anything that can be redeemed. For the parent who did not receive wisdom from their own family and is desperate not to pass the same patterns on to their children. God does not condemn you for where you have been. He offers you something far more valuable, a new orientation, a new direction, the chance to begin building your life on a different foundation, starting today. You do not need to have a dramatic conversion experience. You do not need to immediately become a different person. You need to take one step, one honest, humble, deliberate step in the direction of wisdom. Read one chapter of Proverbs. Ask one genuine question of God. Have one honest conversation with someone who knows you well. Make one decision differently, not based on impulse, not based on what everyone else is doing, but based on what you genuinely believe is right and true and wise. And then take another step, and another, because that is what wisdom is, not a moment of arrival, but a direction of travel, a commitment to a certain kind of life, lived one decision at a time, oriented around the one truth that Proverbs returns to again and again.
Here is what I want you to carry away from everything we have explored today. The Book of Proverbs is a love letter from God to a humanity that keeps choosing the hard way. It is a voice that has been speaking for 3,000 years in every language, to every culture, to every generation, saying, here is how life actually works. Here are the invisible laws. Here is the map. You don't have to keep learning everything the hard way. You don't have to keep stepping into the same traps. You don't have to keep arriving at the same painful destinations and wondering how you got there again. There is a better way, a way that has been tested across millennia by millions of people in every conceivable set of circumstances, a way that holds up under pressure, that produces genuine flourishing rather than just temporary satisfaction, that builds something lasting rather than something that dissolves the moment the initial excitement fades. That way is wisdom, and wisdom begins in one place and only one place: the fear of the Lord. Not fear as paralysis, not fear as slavery, but the deep, grounding, orienting recognition that God is real, that His ways are trustworthy, that His design for human life is better than anything you could engineer on your own, and that submitting your life to His wisdom, however countercultural that may feel in the age you are living in, is the most intelligent, most life-giving, most genuinely courageous thing you could possibly do.
This is what Solomon wanted you to know. This is what God preserved across 3,000 years of history and handed to you today. Not as a burden, not as a restriction, but as a gift. The wisest man who ever lived, writing from a palace in Jerusalem at the peak of the ancient world's golden age, looked at everything human beings chase after: wealth, pleasure, power, knowledge, recognition, and he said, none of it is worth anything without this. None of it lasts. None of it satisfies. None of it actually delivers what it promises. But wisdom, the wisdom that begins with God and flows into every corner of your life, that is worth everything. Everything else is a footnote to it. Choose wisdom. Pursue it like buried treasure. Guard your heart. Speak with care. Work with excellence. Hold your money with open hands. Build your friendships with honesty and loyalty. Face your pride and choose humility. Keep seeking correction. Keep growing. Keep walking in the direction of what is true and right and good, even when the other road looks easier, even when the other voice sounds more appealing, even when no one is watching. And when you stumble, and you will, because we all do not stay down. The righteous person falls 7 times and rises again. Get up, learn, adjust, and keep walking. That is the invitation of Proverbs. That is the invitation of God Himself, spoken across 31 chapters of some of the most durable wisdom ever recorded. Still alive, still true.
Still available to you today. Take it. If this walked you through something important today, if something here connected with you, challenged you, or sparked something you needed to think about, share this with someone who is at a crossroads, someone who needs to hear that there is a map, someone who is tired of learning everything the hard way. And if you aren't yet part of the Bible Unfiltered community, subscribe now, because we go through God's Word exactly like this, chapter by chapter, book by book, with full honesty, full depth, and nothing held back. There is so much more to explore, and you don't want to miss it. Tell me in the comments which part of Proverbs hit you hardest today, and which book of the Bible do you want us to open next? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom, once found, changes everything.